The process server handed me the conservatorship petition in my own kitchen, and I almost laughed because the last psychiatric evaluation on file wasn't from Michael's chosen doctor at all. I stood there for a moment in my socks, holding the manila envelope. My 4-month-old daughter was napping upstairs. The process server shifted awkwardly by the door. I thanked him. I actually thanked him because I had spent the last 3 weeks waiting for exactly this envelope to arrive. There is a strange, quiet relief in watching a threat you've anticipated finally take a shape you can fight. I opened it standing at my kitchen island, the same island where Michael and I had once mapped out the entire seed funding pitch for Halcyon Analytics. 6 years ago, when it was just the two of us, and a dream, and considerably less money than either of us knew what to do with. The petition was 14 pages long. It requested, in careful legal language dressed up as concern, that the court appoint my husband, Michael Bennett, as my temporary conservator, citing significant and ongoing impairment following the birth of our daughter, and recommending immediate transfer of decision-making authority over all business assets, including my 62% stake in Halcyon Analytics. My name is Rachel Bennett. 4 years ago, I built Halcyon Analytics from a 2-person data consulting operation into a company valued at just under $40 million. I did this while pregnant, while breastfeeding, while running board meetings from a hospital recovery room. I held 62% ownership, a controlling stake I negotiated for myself years before Michael's family ever showed the faintest interest in what I did for a living. That interest changed considerably once Halcyon's valuation crossed 8 figures. I read the petition twice, and I felt something cold and precise settle behind my ribs. Not panic. The particular clarity that arrives when you finally understand the full shape of a threat you'd only been able to see pieces of before. Attached to the petition were 2 letters. The first, from a psychiatrist I had never met, Dr. Warren Fitch, describing documented episodes of postpartum emotional dysregulation based on what he called a comprehensive clinical interview. I had never sat down with Dr. Warren Fitch. I had never consented to any evaluation by him. I had never, as far as I could recall, even heard his name before that morning, which meant one of 2 things. Either the petition was built on an interview that never happened, or Michael had found a way to get me into a room with this man, without my ever understanding what the visit was actually for. I thought back, slowly, deliberately, through the last 6 weeks. And then, I remembered, 3 weeks after our daughter was born, Michael had suggested I talk to someone. Gently. He'd set up the appointment himself. Told me it was with a family wellness consultant. I had never once been told his name was Dr. Warren Fitch. I had never been told he was a licensed psychiatrist. I had certainly never signed a consent form, authorizing a clinical evaluation intended for use in a legal proceeding. I set the petition down on the granite counter and picked up my phone. 6 years of marriage. 4 years of building something extraordinary. And now, my husband and his parents were attempting to have a court declare me legally incompetent so that a man who held 0 shares in Halcyon Analytics could suddenly control 62% of it. I scrolled through my contacts and stopped on a name I hadn't needed to call in nearly 2 years. James Cho. "Rachel," he said. "It's been a while. Everything all right with the baby?" "She's perfect," I said. "I need you to look at something. I just got served with a conservatorship petition." There was a pause on the line. Brief, but total. "Filed by whom?" "Michael," I said. "James. They're trying to take Halcyon." Another pause. And then, when James spoke again, his voice had shifted into the register I remembered from years earlier. "Rachel," he said, "do you remember 2 years ago when you asked me to set up that independent evaluation for the key person life insurance policy on your Halcyon shares?" I blinked. The insurance underwriting one? Yes, vaguely. That evaluation, James said slowly, was conducted by Dr. Sarah Holloway, court-recognized specialist, completely independent, fully documented, fully consented. James, that evaluation is 2 years old. It's dated 14 months before your daughter was even born, James said. And I could hear something in his voice now that might have been the beginning of quiet satisfaction. Whoever drafted this for Michael made a very serious mistake. What mistake? They don't know Dr. Holloway's evaluation exists. I stood in my kitchen, the late afternoon light slanting gold across the granite counter, where the petition still sat, and felt, for the first time since opening that envelope, the ground beneath me solidify into something I could actually stand on. How fast can you move on this? I asked. Today, James said. But Rachel, I need to ask you something first. Do you have any reason to believe Michael's family has been planning this for a while? I thought about the wellness consultant appointment. I thought about the increasingly frequent visits from my in-laws. I thought about a conversation 6 weeks ago. Michael, standing in our nursery, saying quietly that maybe it was time to think about restructuring some things at Halcyon. James, I said slowly, I think they've been planning this since before she was born. James told me not to confront Michael that night. Let him think the petition is moving forward unopposed, he said. Every day he believes he's winning is a day he keeps talking, keeps documenting his own intentions without realizing it. It was, without question, the hardest advice I had ever followed. Michael came home at 7 that evening, kissed me on the forehead, the way he always did, asked about the baby's afternoon nap schedule, with what appeared to be genuine tenderness. I stood in our kitchen and smiled. Anne did not mention that I now possessed a certified legal document outlining his family's plan to have me declared unfit to run my own life. I have spent a great deal of time since that evening thinking about what it means to have loved someone capable of that particular kind of patience. Over the following days, I began quietly reconstructing the timeline. And the more of it I assembled, the more precisely engineered the whole scheme revealed itself to be. It had started, I now understood, roughly 5 months earlier, during my 3rd trimester. Diane Bennett had begun what I'd interpreted at the time as simply enthusiastic grandmother behavior, twice a week instead of once a month, always finding a reason to stay long enough to observe me, my mood, my energy, the number of times I checked my phone for Halcyon notifications. In retrospect, I understood she had been building a written record. The wellness consultant appointment came next, 4 weeks before my due date. Robert, my father-in-law, a retired attorney himself, had visited only twice during this period, but both visits, I now recalled, involved him asking pointed, almost clinical questions about Halcyon's governance structure, who held signing authority, whether there were provisions for temporary leadership transitions during medical circumstances. I called James 3 days after receiving the petition. This wasn't improvised, I told him. Robert was asking about Halcyon's governance structure months ago. Diane was documenting me like she was building a case file. And the wellness appointment, Michael specifically avoided ever saying the word psychiatrist. That's important, James said. If we can establish the evaluation was obtained through deliberate deception, it doesn't just weaken their petition. It potentially exposes Dr. Fitch to a licensing board complaint. I hadn't confronted Michael yet, but I had begun, carefully, testing the edges of the situation, mentioning, offhandedly, that I'd been thinking about restructuring some of Halcyon's board provisions, watching his face for a reaction. The reaction, when it came, was subtle, but unmistakable. A flicker of something, not surprise. Calculation. That's probably smart, actually, he said. Maybe we should talk to my dad about it. My dad? Robert, the retired attorney who had spent 2 visits quietly mapping Halcyon's decision-making structure. I said that sounded like a good idea, kissed my husband, and went to bed that night, lying rigid and awake beside a man I had shared 6 years, a company, and a daughter with, running through every gentle, loving gesture of our marriage, and wondering, with a kind of grief I hadn't expected, how many of them had actually been reconnaissance. 9 days after the original petition arrived, James called. "I filed our response today," he said. "Dr. Holloway's evaluation, the insurance underwriting documentation, a formal motion challenging the validity of Dr. Fitch's assessment. The hearing is scheduled for next Thursday. Does Michael know yet?" "He will within the hour," James said. I closed my eyes. Sitting alone in Halcyon's downtown office, surrounded by the company I had built, and nearly lost to the very family who was supposed to love me for building it. "Good," I said. "Let him find out the way I did, without warning, and completely unprepared." Michael came home 3 hours after James's filing was served, and for the first time in 6 years of marriage, I watched my husband walk through our front door, like a man entering a room. He no longer fully understood. He didn't say anything at first. He set his keys down on the entryway table, stood there for a long moment, his back to me, his shoulders rigid, in a way I'd never seen before. "You had a psychiatric evaluation," he said finally, still not turning around. "2 years ago, and you never told me. It was for the key person insurance policy," I said, my voice steady, because I had rehearsed this moment every night for the past 9 days. "James arranged it. I told you about it at the time, Michael." He turned around, and his face had an expression I'd never seen on him before. Not anger exactly. The specific, unsettled look of a man watching a plan he'd spent months constructing quietly come apart in real time. "That's not what I remember," he said. "I know it isn't," I said, "because you weren't paying attention to it at the time, the same way I wasn't paying attention 4 months ago, when your mother suddenly started documenting every visit." "Rachel, don't," I said, and my voice didn't rise, didn't crack, stayed exactly as level as it had been in every board meeting I'd ever run. "I've had 9 days to decide how this conversation was going to go, and I've decided I'm not interested in you explaining to me why you thought having your family declare me legally incompetent was something done out of love. Dr. Fitch," I said, "tell me his real specialty, Michael." Michael was quiet for a long moment. "He's a psychiatrist my dad's firm has used before," he said finally. "For competency evaluations, in estate disputes mostly. So you took your postpartum wife to a lawyer's competency evaluation psychiatrist, told her it was a wellness check-in, and then used his report to seize control of a company she built, before she'd even met your family." "I thought I was protecting Halcyon," Michael said, something almost pleading in his voice now. "You were exhausted, Rachel. My dad said. He said companies fail all the time when the founder can't step back. And you decided the solution was to have me declared unfit, rather than simply asking me, your wife, whether I wanted help," I said quietly. He sat down heavily at our kitchen table, the same table where we'd once celebrated Halcyon's first million in revenue. "What happens now?" he asked finally. "Now," I said, "there's a hearing on Thursday. You currently hold 0 shares in Halcyon Analytics," I continued. "You never asked for any, back when we got married, because you said you wanted the company to always be unambiguously mine. This petition isn't just an attempt to override my judgment. It's an attempt to seize legal control over an asset you have 0 ownership stake in, using a fabricated medical record obtained without my consent." "Rachel, please," Michael said, his voice cracking on my name, in a way that 6 months earlier would have undone me completely. I never wanted it to go this far. I looked at my husband, a man I had loved fully, a man who had also, apparently, spent 5 months allowing his parents to construct a legal case for my incompetence without once stopping to ask himself whether it was the truth. "Is there anything I can do?" he asked quietly. "Before Thursday?" "You can tell the truth," I said. "All of it." He was quiet for a long time. "I'll call James in the morning," he said finally. "I'll tell him everything." James called at 8 the next morning. "Michael reached out," he said, "voluntarily, gave a full statement, on the record. What does that mean for Thursday?" "I don't think this ends with a denied petition anymore," James said. "I think this ends with your in-laws facing considerably more serious consequences than they ever imagined possible." The courtroom on Thursday morning was smaller than I'd expected, wood-paneled, quiet, the particular hushed formality of a room designed for decisions that would irrevocably alter people's lives. Diane and Robert sat 2 rows back in the gallery, Robert's face arranged into careful neutrality. Diane's hands folded tightly in her lap. She would not meet my eyes. Michael sat at the petitioner's table, alone. Judge Marilyn Osei called the hearing to order. James rose, unhurried, and walked the court through Dr. Holloway's evaluation. "Your Honor," James said, "we would also direct the court's attention to a sworn statement submitted voluntarily 2 days ago by the original petitioner, Michael Bennett." A ripple moved through the gallery. Mr. Bennett describes arranging an appointment for his wife under the deliberately vague description of a family wellness consultation. Judge Osei looked up, her expression sharpening. "Mr. Bennett," she said, addressing Michael directly, "is this statement accurate? You're confirming, under oath, that your wife was not informed she was undergoing a psychiatric evaluation intended for use in a legal proceeding?" Michael stood slowly. I watched him, and for the first time in our entire relationship, I saw him choose, deliberately, and in public, honesty over the version of events that would have been easier to live with. "Yes, Your Honor," he said. "She wasn't told. I knew, at the time, that if I'd told her the truth, she wouldn't have gone." The judge turned to Robert. "Mr. Bennett, you're a licensed attorney, is that correct?" "I am, Your Honor," Robert said carefully. "Was this evaluation your idea, Mr. Bennett?" A long pause. "I believed I was protecting my family's interests, Your Honor." "That may be," Judge Osei said. "But genuine concern does not license deception, Mr. Bennett. I am denying this petition, in its entirety." The words landed in the courtroom with a particular finality, and I felt something in my chest that I could only describe as the physical sensation of a held breath, finally releasing, after 9 days of carrying it. "Furthermore," Judge Osei continued, "I am referring this matter to the State Licensing Board, and additionally, to the District Attorney's Office, for evaluation of potential fraud upon the court." Diane, in the gallery, had begun quietly crying. Outside the courthouse, on the wide stone steps, Michael found me before I reached my car. "Rachel," he said, "I know that doesn't undo any of it." "It matters that you did it," I said finally. "It doesn't undo it. Those are 2 separate true things, Michael, and I need us both to be able to hold them at the same time, going forward." Michael and I separated 4 months after the hearing, not explosively, quietly, over a series of long conversations at that same kitchen table where we'd once celebrated Halcyon's first $1 million. I want to be honest about something. Michael was not, in the end, a simple villain. He was a man who had let his father's fear override his own judgment for 5 months. That doesn't excuse what happened. But it also means our ending wasn't a triumphant severing of ties with a monster. It was the slow, sad, unwinding of a partnership between two people who had built something real. We share custody of our daughter now. Evenly, carefully. Robert Bennett's law license is currently under formal review. Dr. Fitch surrendered his medical license voluntarily. Diane and I have not spoken since the courthouse steps. Halcyon Analytics closed its Series C funding round 6 weeks after the hearing, at a valuation nearly double what it had been when that conservatorship petition first arrived on my kitchen island. I still hold 62%. My daughter is 11 months old now. She has no memory, of course, of any of this. Someday, if she asks, I will tell her the truth. I will tell her that her mother built something extraordinary, and that when people tried to take it, by declaring her unfit to keep it, she did not shrink, did not doubt herself into silence, and did not confuse other people's fear for evidence of her own failure. Lessons from this story. Lesson 1. Protect what matters before you ever think you'll need to. The protections that save us are rarely built in the moment of crisis. They're built quietly, years in advance, by people willing to plan for possibilities they hope never arrive. Lesson 2. Concern and control can wear identical clothing, and only consent reveals the difference. Lesson 3. The people who underestimate you rarely do their homework. Being underestimate you is not a burden. It is, very often, the exact space in which your own quiet preparation becomes unstoppable. Lesson 4. Choosing honesty late is still meaningfully different from never choosing it at all. The true measure of a person is not whether they always choose correctly, but whether they remain capable of choosing better once they finally see clearly.